tuned in to the Andrew Lawton Show.
Let's shift gears here, no pun intended, to yet another big-ticket automotive funding announcement from the federal government in Canada and also the provincial government in Ontario. Justin Trudeau stood and made this proclamation about Honda today.
Today, Honda is making Canadian automotive history. With this announcement, we will be investing to create Canada's first comprehensive electric vehicle supply chain from start to finish. Aujourd'hui, on annonce que Honda va investir pour créer la première chaîne d'approvisionnement complète de véhicules électriques au Canada. A whole ecosystem will be built with 4 new manufacturing plants in Ontario, including an EV assembly plant, a standalone battery manufacturing plant, and 2 plants for battery components. These investments will create well over 1,000 well-paying manufacturing jobs, as well as many, many construction jobs, and of course, jobs all across Ontario and the country for auto parts suppliers. But this announcement isn't just about creating jobs. It's about securing good jobs and careers for the coming decades and even the coming generations. Honda has set a goal to make EVs represent 100% of vehicle sales by 2040. In Canada, our target is that 100% of all light-duty cars and passenger truck sales be zero emission by 2035. And that underlines what we've always said. Climate policy is economic policy. And with its impact on families and communities around here, it's also social policy.
Wow, it sounds phenomenal. It's social policy, it's environmental policy, it's economic policy, it's great. You notice in that announcement, he mentioned that Honda is investing $15 billion. He's there announcing Honda's investment. Honda's putting the money forward. Well, look, I think if Honda wants to spend $15 billion and build 4 electric vehicle plants in Ontario, that's great. But it isn't just Honda that is putting money towards this. This part has been buried a little bit, even in the government press release. It's way, way, way down below what Honda's putting up. It's what you and I are putting up. Aaron Wudrick is with me. He is the head of the domestic policy program over at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Aaron, what are we missing here? It's not just Honda's money, is it?
No, it's not. And you wondered if it was Honda's money, what on earth would all these politicians be doing there, stepping up to a podium? It's great if you have a company that wants to invest that kind of money in Canada. That's a great sign. But of course, the devil's in the details. And it turns out, Andrew, you and I and other taxpayers in Canada and Ontario, we're on the hook for $5 billion out of that $15 billion. So a whole third of that is going to be coming out of our pockets to go to Honda, who are doing okay. I checked this morning when I saw the announcement. You know, they made $8 billion US in global profit last year. So this is not a company that is hard done by. This is clearly a company that's got the resources to invest their own money, which is great, and they should do that, and we should welcome that. But that does not explain why Canadian taxpayers are being forced to stick $5 billion of their own money. That we pay taxes for public services, Andrew. Instead, they're turning around and giving it to a very profitable multinational corporation.
I don't consider myself to be a mathematician. I, always double check with a calculator to make sure I'm not getting anything right. But I was told that this would create 1,000 jobs. Now you may think, okay, 1,000 jobs, that's phenomenal. And I remember billions are the ones with 9 zeros. So I can work back from there. That works out to be, again, correct my math here, $5 million per job.
That's exactly right. And Andrew, it is as crazy as it sounds. People might say, well, that doesn't sound quite right. Well, it is right. They are actually subsidizing the equivalent of $5 million per job. So you heard the Prime Minister there. He said they'd be well-paying jobs. Boy, I hope they're really well-paying jobs if we're paying $5 million a pop just to create them.
Yeah, and again, I mean, not that I'm recommending this as policy, but it would literally be cheaper just to walk around Alliston and give everyone $1 million and would probably have more of an economic benefit because then at least their people are spending it. Like, this is absurd, and there's no ROI on this. Like, you'll never make that money back.
No, and look, the government always has. I know all the lines right now. If you're familiar with these types of announcements, you can pretty much sing the song. They're going to talk about spin-offs. They're going to talk about other impacts in the community. But the reality is, we are paying these companies to create these jobs. Andrew, when I hear politicians talk about good-paying jobs and the importance of them, that's always on the presumption that they're being generated by the private sector. If you're going in and essentially paying the salary of these people for the company, it's not really a private sector job. It's essentially a government job masquerading as a private sector job. That has a very different impact on the bottom line of the government, right? The whole reason we want these jobs is because they generate tax revenue that we can spend on public services. Instead, these kinds of announcements, they are taking resources out, things we're not spending on things like roads and hospitals and schools and the kinds of things you expect your tax money is supposed to go towards.
Well, and the other part of it too is that the companies themselves tend to have very little in the way of oversight to maximize how many jobs they're creating. I mean, one big example this week has been the letter from the union representing a lot of workers at the Stellantis plant in Windsor that they're building, and they're saying, well, hold on, we were told this was going to be to create Canadian jobs, yet we're seeing a large number of foreign workers that are being brought in. So Korean workers are benefiting from this money that the federal and provincial governments have given to Stellantis and LG. And of course, the government says, oh, well, it's, specialized skills and whatnot. And then you have Oakville and Ford, again, a heavily subsidized EV battery plant delayed, I think, until 2027. So now you have a company that is, for business reasons, as it's permitted to do, dragging its heels on this. So we're not even getting the benefit of these jobs that we were all promised. And this is happening time and time again in these cases where it's not even like that core deliverable even pans out.
Well, it never does, and it's because it comes down to the fact the government is trying to do central planning here with who's supposed to be a private actor. I mean, just the very fact that you're setting a number saying you have to hire 1,000 people. Well, companies normally hire based on what they need, right? They hire or let people go based on their economic need, what makes sense for them, what they can afford. The government sets this number. I mean, it doesn't make sense to tell a company you have to hire exactly 1,000 people or you don't. I mean, it is just completely undermines the very ethos of like a private sector company. The other thing, Andrew, that I noticed that was interesting is they mentioned in the press release that it's not just about the 1,000 new jobs, which, by the way, are often just jobs taken from other sectors. They're not net new jobs. They talk about retaining existing jobs. So that starts to sound to me a lot like something like a ransom fee, right? You've got 4,000 people already employed at this plant. Be a real shame if something happened to those jobs if we don't get this handout. So I find that a very troubling development.
One of the arguments that you always get from people on this, and I'm curious how you refute it, is this idea that, well, this is just these are the rules of the game, and is that if we don't, Iowa's going to, or New York State is going to, and we just don't get any of it. And you saw this particularly exploited by Amazon when they were launching their, Amazon headquarters, and they basically just put out this open call, hey, who's going to pay us the most to set up shop there? But what is the answer to that? Because no one likes this idea that, we just say, all right, we're not going to play this game. All right, well, everyone's going somewhere else.
Yeah, well, two things. One, it's hard to blame companies for this when governments signal that they're willing to play the game. They get taught to do this, right? They get taught that, like, I should look for the handout. Frankly, because what if my competitor does and I don't? Then I'm on the back foot. Look, the short answer is there's this assumption always that we need to be in that line of work, right? Like, we have to outbid the Americans on aerospace or we won't be able to build planes here. We need to outbid the Americans on EVs or we won't be able to. Well, it's just assumed that we need to be in the business of building EVs. I'm sure it's nice to be in the business of building EVs if it makes economic sense, but to be in it for the sake of it, if it costs you more to be in it than you get from being in it, it doesn't make any sense. And the example we always use, and others have pointed this out, is Australia. I mean, Australia used to be a place where they built cars. Eventually, they just gave up because they didn't want to play this game. Guess what happened? There was no recession. There was no mass unemployment. There was no guess. It's just that the capital went into other industries and jobs and companies were created in other sectors. So this myth that if we lose, building cars, we don't build cars in Canada, there will be this huge hole. It's simply not true. It is not played out anywhere else. And, we have to start pushing back on this assumption that we must be in the business of doing this one specific thing.
Well, and the other aspect too, and I played that clip before you came on of Justin Trudeau saying this isn't just an economic policy, but it's an environmental policy and a social policy. I mean, he thinks that's a good thing. I think that makes it worse because it means the government is trying to inject almost like a social engineering into what could be and should be economic policy. And I think on electric vehicles, that's particularly concerning because we have huge issues with electric vehicles. You have a declining consumer interest in them. It's not to say that they won't eventually become the thing that everyone uses, but we're not there right now. So government is trying to manipulate the market and create a supply when there isn't a demand there. So it's not even like, for setting aside the moral question of whether corporate welfare is good, it's not even like they're targeting it in a way that is particularly sustainable. This is still an emerging industry.
Absolutely. They're wasting a vast amount of resources pursuing that social goal. And I mean, you can agree or disagree with that goal, but the amount of resources they're deploying towards it are massive, right? I mean, I followed the Bombardier file for close to a decade, and the amount of money we're talking about on the EV file is about 10 times, what got sunk into Bombardier, which was itself a disaster. So it's a huge sum of money in pursuit of a goal that, I don't have a problem with electric vehicles, but they're going to become prominent when the market says so, when they make sense for most people, when the price comes down, when the infrastructure is in place. It's not going to happen by government fiat. It's not going to happen because the government subsidizes the heck out of the production and the purchase, and lays down this fiat that's saying we have to have it by this date. So this government is trying to speed something along that has to happen at its own pace. The market is going to see to it, and they're wasting a massive amount of resources along the way.
Aaron Wudrick from the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Always a pleasure, sir.
Thanks a lot, Andrew.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.